Is it already time for the New York Jets to move on from Zach Wilson and find a different quarterback? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're here part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday. That means you have me, Kevin Oestreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens, and one of the many NFL experts here on our network. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn jobs to find the qualified candidates you want to talk to fast about your job for free on LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to push your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are a 5-day-a-week NFL podcast bringing you the biggest stories across the league. And week 2 was another doozy. We had a lot of good games, a lot of hard-fought games, also a couple blowouts here and there. We're going to be diving in to the biggest storylines from week 2 from Sunday's action. We're first going to be getting into a conversation with John Butchko about Zach Wilson and the New York Jets. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers tears his Achilles just a couple plays into his New York Jets tenure out for the year. So it's now the Zach Wilson show. But after 3 interceptions showing in the fourth quarter against Dallas in a blowout, we talk with John about if it's already time for the Jets to move on from Wilson and find somebody else. Then we'll talk with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants about Saquon Barkley. Ended up going down with an ankle injury, and we have a couple of updates on Barkley. Obviously, we don't know everything yet. We'll talk with Patricia about what she knows so far, and also that Giants comeback win against the Arizona Cardinals. Then in the final segment, we'll move on, talk with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers about Brandon Staley, an 0-2 start for the Chargers. Is Brandon Staley on the hot seat? So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with John Butchko of Locked On Jets. The New York Jets obviously suffered one of the more devastating injuries we've seen over the past couple of seasons, with Aaron Rodgers going down, tearing his Achilles just a couple plays into his New York Jets debut. And here to talk about what is next for the Jets after a week 2 20-point loss to the Dallas Cowboys, where Zach Wilson throws 3 fourth-quarter interceptions, is John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets. And John, I know just the devastating feeling that Jets fans went through last week as Rodgers goes down. The injury updates come out and they come out and they come out, and you hear he tears the Achilles. Zach Wilson, the new guy in New York, but in this 30-10 loss to Dallas in week 2, throws 3 fourth-quarter interceptions, 170 yards for Zach Wilson. What did you see from him, whether encouraging, not encouraging, or both?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that, he threw 3 interceptions in the fourth quarter, but all 3 of them came in garbage time. The game was long lost by that point, so they weren't necessarily significant for the game. I think if you're listing the reasons the Jets lost this game, Zach Wilson rates very low. I think that the first half, you actually saw some good things from him. You saw him actually make a couple good reads, which is something you'd expect from an NFL quarterback, but it's something Zach Wilson really hasn't done much in his first 2 seasons. You saw times where he had this really bad tendency the first 2 years to just drift back. The first time he felt pressure, he'd like run back as far as he could. You saw him either step up in the pocket or slide left to right and extend plays. So there's been progress from Zach Wilson. There's been improvement, but I think you have to understand that progress and improvement are relative terms. I mean, Zach Wilson's starting from a really low point. And if you look at the players who are comparable statistically his first 2 seasons, I mean, you're getting into the realm of Kyle Bowler, Joey Harrington, Ryan Leaf's a name that's been to Jamarcus Russell. It's a really undistinguished list. So Zach Wilson could be better. That still doesn't mean he's good enough. And I don't think Zach Wilson's the reason the Jets lost this game. Going in, everybody said that the Jets defense needs to carry this team. You cannot put yourself in a position where Zach Wilson needs to carry this team on his back. And in the portion of the game where it was close, where the Jets were within striking distance, I think Zach Wilson did okay. Things fell apart in the portion where he essentially needed to carry the team on his back and tried to do too much. But did I see anything that makes me super confident in Zach Wilson going forward in this game? No.
And it kind of goes back, John, to what we were talking about all last season, all off season before the Jets actually traded for Rodgers, which is, oh, well, if the Jets had a quarterback, this defense is good enough. But what if they had a more competent, I guess is the word I'll use, quarterback at that position? With Rodgers going down, now you're on to Wilson. And it's so hard now because the season's already started. So it's not like teams are just going to give you a quarterback. And it's not like anybody else out there is this stud Pro Bowl All-Pro type of player. So do you think that the Jets should be looking for someone else to come in, maybe take Zach Wilson's spot? Or do you think that they just have to kind of ride it out because this is the plan they had all offseason if Rodgers were to go down in the first place?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think they should absolutely be looking for any upgrade that's out there, whether that's in the trade market, whether that's in free agency. The problem is that anybody who's a good quarterback already has a team right now. And if you look across the league, if you have a good backup quarterback, you're probably looking at what happened to the Jets and saying, you know what, this guy's pretty valuable because of what's happening with the Jets right now. And I think, this is maybe we're getting into like conspiracy John territory, but I feel like the Jets are almost stuck with Zach Wilson because they felt like they had to like sell this narrative that like Aaron Rodgers is going to mentor Zach Wilson and he's going to fix him. And I think like they just kind of like tried to play into that, and maybe it was to their own detriment because they benched Zach Wilson last year, and they brought in Mike White, and then Mike White got injured, and they put Zach Wilson back in the lineup. I don't think they did Zach Wilson any favors by reinserting him into the lineup late last season. He started 2 games, one against Detroit where he was actually okay, and then one against Jacksonville, which is a disaster, where he ended up getting benched for Chris Streveler, who was a preseason folk hero and a practice squad player for the Jets. It's a tough spot for the Jets right now at the quarterback. Like any team that loses its quarterback week 1 on the first series is obviously going to face a lot of issues. But I think that if the Jets were serious about this thing with Zach Wilson, if they really believe Zach Wilson is our future, they would have gone out and gotten another number 2 quarterback, because I just don't think it's good for Zach Wilson to be playing right now. I think last year, as much as anything, he lost a lot of confidence the way things happened. And I think the biggest thing for them was try and rebuild his confidence. And, you said it, it was a game where it wasn't really his fault, but the headline a lot of people are taking from this is he threw 3 interceptions in the fourth quarter. And I just think that mentally that may not be the best thing for Zach Wilson. I think the Jets and this is not a second guess. This is something I said a lot on Locked On Jets in the offseason. I don't think the Jets handled this well, and I don't think they did Zach Wilson any favors by making him the number 2 quarterback this year.
And now with Rodgers done for the year and Wilson coming in, whoever the quarterback is, whether it's Wilson or somebody else they bring in, I think expectations for the Jets compared to what they were before the season, John, are lowered in some way, shape, or form. But to you, what do you think the Jets can do with Wilson? Can the defense carry them enough? Can the skill position players carry them enough? What can the Jets still do in 2023?
So Joe Flacco started the first couple of games for the Jets last year, so it wasn't all Wilson, but the Jets were 5-2 at one point last year, and it was because they rode a great defense. They had Breece Hall, who was on his way to. I think he was going to win the Rookie of the Year last year, and it's funny because one of his teammates, Garrett Wilson, actually ended up winning the Rookie of the Year. And then they just didn't ask a whole lot from their passing game. Now, I think that that's not necessarily a formula they can carry forward to the degree they did in those first 7 games, because they also ran into a lot of backup quarterbacks during that stretch. So it was, they didn't really need to get a whole lot. The competition this year is going to be better. But I think the formula is not that different. I think the formula is this defense needs to play well. And the defense was awful in this game. And I don't think they'd win this game if Aaron Rodgers was at quarterback. Breece Hall only got 4 carries, and he also put out a tweet or an X or whatever you want to call it of 4 football emojis, which, if you are reading between the lines, I think that is pretty easy to. I think sometimes maybe we misinterpret what a player puts out on social media. Sometimes like there's some cryptic tweet or X that's not really the player saying what we think he's saying. But after a game where he gets 4 carries and he puts out 4 football emojis, pretty clear that he's not happy with what happened, but he's got to be a bigger part of the offense going forward. And I think I can't figure out how Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, only gave him the ball 4 times in this game. But going forward, it kind of has to be the opposite of what happened in this game. You need better defense, you need good defense, and you need Breece Hall to carry the load. And is that a great plan? I mean, look, this is a league where quarterbacks really matter. So you're at a disadvantage. I'm not saying it's the best plan out there. I'm just saying it might be the best plan the Jets can come up with right now.
We'll see what the Jets do. Major shout out to John for providing some insight on New York and that team. And for more on John's work, check him out over the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So much still to get to on Locked On NFL. Coming up, we'll be diving in to Saquon Barkley and what his ankle might be doing right now for the New York Giants. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Plenty to talk about here on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And these days, every potential hire can really feel like a high-stakes wager for a small business. You want to be 100% certain you have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs to find the right people for your team faster and for free. And for me, I've had a ton of great experiences with LinkedIn, whether it's been looking for jobs, sending friends jobs. There are a lot of different ways LinkedIn can be used in a really positive way. And it's really easy to create a free job post over on LinkedIn Jobs. All you have to do is add your job in the profile hashtag hiring frame to your profile to spread the word that you're hiring over on LinkedIn. They have simple tools you can use too, like screening questions to make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience. You can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and who you'd like to hire. And it's really important to start and end the year strong, and the right team member might help you do that. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one, delivering quality hires versus hitting competitors. LinkedIn Jobs to find the qualified candidates you want to talk to fast about your job for free. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to push your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. And if you're looking for daily fantasy sports, look no further than PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the most fun so many have had, winning up to 25 times their money this football season. All I have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. And PrizePicks is super simple to play too. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. And you might have selected maybe Saquon going for more than his projected total, Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, you weren't picking him this week. Maybe for Lamar, you wanted to go for more on Lamar's touchdown total, Justin Jefferson, more for his projected yard total. So many offers over on PrizePicks and weekly promotions as well that can lead to big pals like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts like player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. So go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for our first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for our first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Monday, right after Sunday's Week 2 action, diving into the biggest storylines. We talk with John Butchko of Locked On Jets, but now let's move over to the other New York team, the New York Giants. Talk with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants about how Saquon Barkley's ankle is doing, an update on him. Also, that Giants come from behind win. We'll get into our conversation with Patricia right now. The New York Giants pick up a win against the Arizona Cardinals, but it might have come at a bit of a price as Saquon Barkley goes down. Here to talk about the latest on Saquon and just who this Giants team is right now is Patricia Traina, the host of Locked On Giants. And Patricia, the Giants escape with a 3-point win behind a 17-point fourth quarter, the comeback there. But Saquon does go down. So before we get into the game, let's start with him. He goes down very late into the game as the Giants are trying to win the game. What do you have on Saquon, and what would it mean if he's out long-term for the Giants?
Well, right now, all we know is that x-rays were negative, which means there's nothing broken. But he's going to have an MRI on Monday. That's going to tell us the story because, look, when he got injured, it looked like somebody rolled up on his ankle and it got caught underneath him. And the way he reacted afterwards, how he pounded his fist on the turf, and then on the sideline, he basically took his helmet off and slammed it down on the turf. That wasn't promising. And in the locker room afterwards, according to what I heard, he was walking around with a noticeable limp, looked swollen. So the concern I think that the Giants have is it a high ankle sprain? And if it is a high ankle sprain, I don't see him being ready for Thursday night's game against the 49ers. And who knows how much time he'll miss. But either way, it's a devastating result for Saquon Barkley, who, as you know, playing on the 1-year franchise tag offer, looking for that big payday, looking to stay healthy, gambling on himself. And now this had to happen.
Yeah, and it almost, Patricia, brings us back to the conversations that we had throughout the offseason when I was asking you about Saquon's contract. What would it mean for the Giants if Saquon doesn't suit up in week one? What if he's not available? Who do the Giants turn to if Saquon has to miss a couple of games here?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think they still have Daniel Jones who can run the ball if they need to, but they don't want to have their quarterback running the ball. So I think it becomes a committee approach. Matt Breida's the backup. You've got Gary Brightwell who can take some snaps. The rookie Eric Gray might be able to take some snaps. They work Paris Campbell out of the backfield on certain plays. So it's going to have to be a committee approach if Saquon cannot go.
And I know that, Patricia, there were expectations for this team coming into the year after their year last year that they blew all those expectations out of the water, but a pretty embarrassing loss in week one, followed up by this, which they were down. They came back and won the game, but against a Cardinals team that is essentially, I don't want to say tanking, but kind of tanking for high draft status. Who do you think this Giants team is right now? Are the expectations now for you a little lower than they were to start the season? Or are you still high on what they can do?
Well, I think they were humbled last week, against the Cowboys. I think that was an eye opener for them because look, just in walking around the locker room leading up to that game, there was a lot of confidence, quiet confidence. Hey, we could stand toe to toe with the Cowboys and so on and so forth. And we saw that they couldn't, at least not in that first game. So I think they've been humbled, but I also think that, the resiliency that they showed in this victory is going to go a long way to maybe, giving them confidence when they go up against the 49ers. Now, the 49ers are one of the better teams in the NFC. So, at this point, if you're the Giants, yes, you would like a win if you can pull it off, but you also want to be able to stay on the same field with the better competition. And that's something they couldn't do last week against the Cowboys. That's something they almost didn't do against the Cardinals, who, as you said, have one of the poorest rosters in the NFL, if not the poorest. And that's something they just need to do next week on Thursday against the 49ers.
Yeah, and I know for Daniel Jones, Patricia, I think any performance would have been better than what he had in week one. Obviously, it was a much better time this time around for Daniel Jones, threw for over 300 yards, had the 2 touchdowns in there with the 1 interception. Was it at least encouraging to see Daniel Jones just be anything better than what he was in week one? Because I know it was not fun for the Giants last week against Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel Jones, look, he's a tough, resilient young man. And when you consider what he did in the second half, did it without Andrew Thomas, who was inactive with the hamstring injury. They lost Ben Bredesen, and they had a replacement, Mark Lewinsky, who, was benched actually at the start of the game. So yeah, Daniel Jones just being able to do all that, despite the fact that, he had a brand new offensive line configuration he was playing behind. It just goes to show you. And the confidence he had in Jalen Hyatt and Darren Waller, I mean, that's never waned. So Daniel Jones just loading that team up on his shoulders and taking them across the finish line.
Yeah, and I know that on defense, Patricia, Don Martindale comes in last year, kind of transforms not only the on-field product, but the culture of that unit. What have you seen from him and his unit through 2 games this year?
Well, I thought the start of the game was a little sloppy in terms of discipline. There were a couple of 15-yard penalties. I think on one drive, the Cardinals' first scoring drive, I want to say they had 2 penalties. And I thought, okay, a little sloppy there. Plays weren't being made. I thought the front 7 was quiet. But again, resiliency. They came back and suddenly the front 7 seemed to wake up from its slumber. You saw plays being made on the back end of the defense. Some of the mistakes and sloppiness you saw in the first half were eliminated. So, they just don't give up. And that's what you want to see. It's like, okay, things aren't going our way, guys. So we can either, quit and go home, or we could keep fighting our way out of it. And they chose to fight their way out of it.
Yeah, and I want to kind of get your opinion on a pretty open-ended question, Patricia. But after 2 weeks, who do you think this New York Giants team is? It is early. I know we don't want to overreact too much to the first month or so of the season, but have your expectations maybe changed at all for this Giants team? Who are they in your estimation right now?
They're probably a middle of the road type team still right now. I mean, look, they beat the team that they were supposed to beat, which was the Cardinals, by 3 points, which, is what I kind of predicted. I think I was off by the score, but I got the deficit right. The Cowboys, I thought they could be competitive against. I thought they could beat them, but we all know what happened in that game. So I would say so far, you might say that the script is kind of going the way a lot of people thought it would, beating the teams that they should beat and not beating the teams that, they're going to lack in talent against. So we'll still find out. There's still, another few weeks before we really get a handle on what kind of team this is. But the resiliency, I mean, that goes a long way. Don't kid yourself. That is a huge, huge development for this Giants team. And we'll see how they're able to parlay that into their performance against the 49ers on Thursday night.
Patricia, given the valuable New York Giants updates and insight. And for more on Patricia's work, go check her out over on the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Still a ton to get to in the final part of our show. We're going to be diving in to Brandon Staley and his early season status with the Los Angeles Chargers. So Patricia, stay tuned. So much still to get to on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So if you got in on some of those bets over the weekend over on FanDuel, you might have won yourself a lot of money. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We're back here, our final segment of this Monday edition of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher is still here with you again. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along, audio form, video form. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. But let's now dive into Brandon Staley, his status with the Chargers. Chargers off to a rough 0-2 start. Daniel Wade is here to take us through what the Chargers are going through and what could be next. Let's get into our conversation with Daniel now. Well, stop me if you've heard this one before. The Los Angeles Chargers lose in a close game, this time to Tennessee Titans, 27-24. In overtime, Nick Folk wins it for the Titans. And here to talk about just what's going on early with the Chargers is Daniel Wade, one of the hosts over at Locked On Chargers. And Daniel, it's an 0-2 start for the Chargers. Again, expectations going into the season were decently high for a Los Angeles team that I feel like a lot of people feels like has the pieces to do it, but just has not done it over the past however many years you want to go back. So let's start off with this game in particular. How did the Chargers let this one slip away?
Well, I think in week one against the Dolphins, it was very easy to point the finger at the defense because you give up, 36 points when it probably should have been more in that game. You kind of understand not putting much on the offense when they put up 34. This week, I would lean more towards the offense not putting the game away. I mean, the Chargers let the Titans hang around, and I just don't think the Titans, coached by Mike Vrabel, are a team you want to let hang around in a game like that. You don't want it to turn into a street fight. That's what it became at the end of the game, and they ended up taking it. But to me, it was the Chargers getting the ball twice in the fourth quarter, up by 4, and they had a 3-and-out and 1 first down on the second series there, 0 points. You get the ball down 3, you go and end up tying it, but you have a chance to win the game with less than 20 seconds left. With a touchdown, you can't get it done. And then a totally, discombobulated first overtime drive where the Chargers go 3-and-out, 3 straight incompletions. The last play snapped early, totally broken play where basically the last 2 plays of the drive, you end up throwing it away. I mean, the defense wasn't great, and they have plenty of blame to share in this loss, but to me, it was the Chargers not being able to finish, which obviously has plagued them not just this season.
Yeah, and I know the Chargers are dealing with a couple of injuries. Austin Eckler not playing in this game. And, every team gets beat up throughout a year, but I know Eckler's had some injury history over the course of his career. I mean, if there were some positives you could at least take away from this game, Daniel, that makes you say, you know what, the Chargers are 0-2, but they've shown me something. What have they shown you, if anything, so far?
Man, I mean, that's hard because, I think, you've seen good things in both games, but you haven't seen a single good thing done in either, in both games. I think there's positives individually you could take away. I mean, in this game, the pass rush looked much better, but Ryan Tannehill completes 20 out of 24 passes, so you can't really feel good about that. I mean, Kellen Moore ran the ball extremely well in the first matchup, over 230 yards, and in this game against a good front, the run game totally disappears. They run the ball in some inopportune moments, and I mean, at the end of the game, can't go and put the game away. I mean, I think when you have Justin Herbert, I mean, a lot of people are going to put this on him. He definitely had his chances. Justin Herbert's not the problem. Justin Herbert is arguably the only thing keeping the Chargers from being close in a lot of these games to being a truly terrible football team. But it's so hard to find the positives in a game like this. 5 sacks is nice. I think they do have something in their rookie. Tuli Tuipulotu just had his best game and his only second career game in the NFL. Had a couple of really good plays. But besides that, man, I mean, after 0-2, it's pretty hard to find a lot of silver linings.
And now the Chargers have to play the Vikings on the road. They'll go play in Minnesota. Then they have the Raiders and the Cowboys and the Chiefs. So when talking about a coach, Daniel and Brandon Staley, who I know a lot of people probably would have anticipated would be fired after last season's debacle, he comes back. Now his team is 0-2. How far do you think this thing has to go? How bad do you think this thing has to get? I know you've probably talked about it a ton over on Locked On Chargers, but what's kind of the status of Brandon Staley? And do you think that there could be an early season coach firing if it doesn't get better?
Hanging on by a thread is, I think, the best way to kind of sum it up for Brandon Staley. The Chargers don't usually fire coaches. I mean, it's been more than 20 years since they fired a coach midseason. It's not usually the way things go, but if the losses start to pile up, I mean, you have another tough matchup with the Vikings, who have had a couple close games to open up their season as well. That's not going to be an easy matchup. The Raiders are coming up, so I mean, he will have a chance, right, to save his job. If this thing goes 0-4 at the bye week, I don't think anyone's safe. I don't know how you could sit here, with this team, with this quarterback specifically, and say, hey, if you're 0-4, you're still going to get the chance to work it out the rest of the season. If I had to guess, I'd say they probably win a couple. He kind of can stay around for the rest of the season if things don't go totally off the rails. But I mean, to say he's on the hot seat feels like an understatement. I mean, at this point, it feels like he has to come back and win his job back. If the season ended today, there's no chance Brandon Staley's, keeping the reins in 2024. He has to really, I think, show this front office and, coaching staff, the rest of the players that are out there, that he is the guy, and he's going to have 15 games to do it, but it's hard to feel very good about it at the moment.
Yeah, and then if you do that, the Chargers are looking at, in the offseason, a coaching overhaul. You got to go get on new coaches for everything. But the Chargers added a new offensive coordinator this past offseason, and Kellen Moore, former Cowboys guy. I mean, how does the new offense look to you as a whole with Kellen Moore's fingerprints on it?
I think overall it's been good. I think it's been welcome changes, but I think at the same time, you're coming off of a game where you go 2 of 14 on third down. That's just not good enough. And it's an incredibly small sample size. I think that one of the things that was promised during the offseason, one of the things that was talked about ad nauseum, was just the Chargers being a vertical passing attack, pushing the ball down the field, using Justin Herbert's tools to their advantage. And we haven't seen much of that over the first 2 weeks. The first week against the Fangio defense, they ran the ball a lot. That seemed like more game script related, more than just, not trusting Justin Herbert to do it. But the second game, the Chargers had a much better matchup against a banged-up Tennessee Titans secondary. And still, I mean, a play here or there, but for the most part, it seemed like a very challenging day for this offensive line, which has a lot of pieces in stone for the next few seasons and key moments not coming up clutch. And then for Justin Herbert and this offense, just too little, too late. I mean, they just couldn't get things together. It feels like they're trying to push tempo at the wrong times. It feels like Justin Herbert's trying to do everything the way Kellen Moore kind of wants the things done in this offense, hurrying things up, using their tempo. But at times it seems like they're just not on the same page. And maybe that's something that works itself out because it is 2 games into a season and he is a brand new guy. The Chargers did not play their starters in the preseason. I'd say overall it's much better. I like it better than the Joe Lombardi experience, but it's just hard to argue after a game, again, where you go 2 of 14 on third down and then you have multiple chances to put a game away and to finish, to run up the score even, like Kellen Moore has talked about before, and they weren't able to do it.
The Chargers have some time to right the ship, but not a very strong early start, especially with how they've just always been this team that loses close games. So huge shout out to Daniel and from Ron, his work. Check him out over at the Locked On Chargers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for being here and tuning in with us today. When we get back in tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday host. Be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.